Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program coordinator for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. So today's topic is assessment in the secondary classroom, and we have a guest in the studio with us today. Please welcome Dr. Terry Pantuso, Associate Dean for Assessment and Curricular Matters in the College of Arts and Sciences here at Texas A&M University. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I want to add I am also an Instructional Associate Professor of English, so I still have my teaching title.
Yeah, and a former high school educator, as we'll get to here in a second.
Yes, and an Aggie.
Yeah, and an Aggie. So that's actually my first question, and that is just give us a little bit of background about who you are, where you come from, what you taught, how did you make it here to A&M? Give us your life story.
Oh, thanks, Kendrick. I appreciate it. Well, my career journey has been one that I honestly never really planned. To begin with, I'm a first-generation high school graduate. So college wasn't really something I planned to do, but I did. I got a BA in political science from Texas A&M, and I thought I might want to be a lawyer. Decided that really wasn't the career for me after I did an internship with the Brazos County DA's office. So then I returned to what I thought I always wanted to do, what I pretended to do when I was a child, which was line my dolls up and put papers in front of them and teach.
Nice.
So that's when let's go back to play. So I returned after I graduated and finished up my coursework and did my student teaching and everything as a post-bac student. Mm-hmm. Did my student teaching in San Antonio and began teaching freshman and sophomore English in San Antonio ISD.
So I'll stop you here for a second. So you mentioned that you were a post-bac graduate. So well, there's different ways to be having teacher certification. They're all, pretty much equally viable in a lot of cases. And so like myself, I went through the undergraduate pathway here at A&M, which is, now called Aggie Teach. And you went through the graduate certification pathway. So that's interesting that differences here, but we have kind of similar stories there.
Yeah, but I would encourage anybody to go through the Aggie Teach way because the post-bac way is the post-broke way because you don't get funding. It's called graduate, but it's not really graduate. It's that in-between world. Mm-hmm. So I'm so glad that this program is here.
Yeah,
it would have saved me time back then. So.
All right, so pick up where you left off. You were a high school teacher?
Yes. I spent about 5 years in San Antonio ISD at 2 different high schools, and I taught every variation of English from freshmen through seniors, as well as creative writing. I was also the dance, pep, and cheer director, so, just a little bit busy.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so after, I think I was in my 5th year when my first child was born, and at the end of that school year, I moved from San Antonio ISD to Northeast ISD, which is also in San Antonio, but was closer to where my house was because I wanted to give up all that coaching stuff and be a mom, but still teach.
Right.
And I started there. I taught for, I think, about 7 years in that district. And that included everything from 8th grade through seniors. And that's also where I was trained in gifted and talented methodologies, as well as AP. And just before my second child was born, I resigned teaching. I taught sophomores, which was the testing grade, and I didn't want them to be stuck with a sub while I was out. She was born in March, so
it's difficult to give her students a long-term sub, especially in a tested subject. And that's kind of the topic for this podcast episode is that testing environment. So we'll certainly get into that. So how'd you get here to A&M?
Well, so I stayed home with my second born. She was born in March, so I resigned in December to give a clean break. My oldest went off to kindergarten in the fall, and I got bored. And so the following January, when my youngest was my middle now, was about 10 months old, I started graduate school at UTSA, completely thinking I'm just going to get a master's and then go back and teach. And you get a pay grade increase when you have a graduate degree.
Small one.
Yeah. You spend more getting the degree than you get in the raise, but there are perks that come with it, and different teaching assignments and all of that. So that was my intention. I had no intention of going any further. I didn't know what graduate school really was because as I mentioned, I come from a first-generation high school graduate background. And I was about a third of the way through my master's program when one of my professors asked me if I wanted to ever consider getting a PhD, and I didn't even know what that stood for. So I kind of fell into this. Needless to say, it was a lot of reading, a lot of hard work, a lot of tears, and 7 years to get a master's and a PhD. But I got both in English, and that's really when my career changed into something that I really had never imagined. I taught for another year while I was still in graduate school. Mm-hmm. Got pregnant with my third child during that time, so then it became the reason I left teaching again was because it was too expensive to pay for daycare for 3 children.
Right. Yeah.
It was cost prohibitive. So I thought, well, we'll just get them growing and then I'll go back to teaching. But then I got this PhD in English, and my first 2 faculty jobs were one was in Illinois and one was in Texas. But I was an English professor and an English education coordinator. As English education coordinator, that means I did everything that goes into mentoring students through their undergraduate experience, their core classes, all the way through student teaching. Oftentimes I did job placement. I worked with their supervisors in the field. I was a student teacher supervisor. I've got that later on. I'll talk about that.
That sounds like a fun job.
It was. I loved it. Didn't pay much, but I loved it. It's fun to grow, go see how someone else teaches.
Yeah. So when I got my master's is it's what they call a practitioner's master's. It's Master's of Arts in Teaching, an MAT. And that, like you said, the perks of that is I got some graduate credit, which allowed me to teach at a community college, allowed me to teach at Texas A&M University Commerce, which is now called East Texas A&M.
Yeah,
they just changed.
I think so.
But that's when I really kind of got the bug to work with pre-service teachers, because that's just a really awesome group of people that need to get started in the right way.
Yeah, I agree. And that, for me, that came after about close to 15 years. I honestly have lost track how many, because with children and everything, I think I spent about 13 years in secondary classroom. But I feel I needed that to be able to step into that position as a coordinator, because I had colleagues who had never been in the secondary classroom, and they would try to give advice to students that it doesn't work. If you've taught 8th grade, you know that, or 9th grade or 10th grade, that you can't just turn the lights off and they'll be quiet. That's not going to be good classroom management.
No, not generally.
No, we'd frown on that. So that's kind of how I wound up. And how did I wind up here is even stranger. I wound up teaching, went through divorce, and so I jumped out of higher ed and went back into secondary teaching. But because I had a PhD and years of teaching and leading students through teacher education, I was hired as an instructional coach in Cy-Fair ISD, very large district in Houston. That was eye-opening to work with teachers they could be veteran teachers, they could be brand new teachers, but they team across grades. So that was really more of a curriculum dive, but then an instructional coach. It was a tough area to navigate. I did that for a year, and then the year afterwards, they really needed a dual credit teacher because we've got a shortage of the people who are qualified. First of all, that have the correct degrees that you need and the experience. So I taught dual credit for a year, and then I went back into higher ed and wound up here in the English department. I wasn't trying to leave it. It was just I honestly got spoiled to being a faculty member and not having to be in one room every day. But there were a lot of perks. I think I had a much more effective day when I taught. I had 4 preps because I had 2 pre-AP and 2 AP of different grade levels, and we had a block schedule. But class started at 9 a.m. and ended at 4. I would go at 7, get there at 7 because my kids were young. I had to drop them off. I had 2 hours before my students hit the room, and so I could grade, I could set everything up, and that was that time alone to go reflect, see where my students are, prepare for them. That really set me up for success, I think, down the line.
Yeah, I think it's a good conversation for us to have, especially me with any of the guest speakers that come on the podcast. Is why did you leave? Why did you end up getting out of education? Because if you're listening now, you're more than likely about to get into education, or you're right in those first few years, and we want you to stay. And you're being almost talked at people who got out. But I think both of us, from listening to you and my own experience, both of us would be right back there in a heartbeat if we could, and if it was the right choice at the right time. And we didn't necessarily leave because it was the worst job in the world.
Oh,
we left because of our situation and being able to move up and help other educators.
And so that brings me to where I am now. I've been lucky. A lot of times I didn't realize it. I was hired as an as a lecturer, and they needed someone to coordinate freshman composition, which is our first year writing. There are people in my department who have PhDs in rhetoric. I do not, but I have some of that background. But because of, again, when I went on the job market looking for English degrees as a tenure track professor, it was that English education piece. Everyone hired me because of my secondary experience. Yeah, it's great you got a PhD. Yeah, you do some nice research, but you know how to teach and you know how to help others teach. So so I guess that's why I stay where I am. Plus the promotion into now I'm in an associate dean level. It's the broader reach. I get to, now we're in a College of Arts and Sciences, I get to work with STEM faculty, which as an 8th grade teacher, we team taught. So I worked, with a history and a science teacher as a core team of a cohort of students.
That sounds fun.
It was. It really was. It's interesting to hear how a student is in your class in the morning and they're different for your colleague in the afternoon.
Yeah, the class that they like versus the class that
Yes. Yeah, I was hurt. Oh, you're the easy one. Why? Because I'm English? Oh, and that's okay. There's a lot that goes on in an English classroom that I think kids feel safe. That's another thing that I love about teaching is that connection. I'm teaching again this semester for the first time in 3 years, and that's probably the thing that I have the most stress over every week. I teach on Tuesday, Thursday at 8 a.m. I'm not an early morning person, but that's the only time that fits my schedule. But I woke up at 4:30 Monday morning thinking, oh, God, okay, this week they have to write, and I need to – it's always there. The teacher is always in me. Yeah. So it's not something I've left. And I have a project I'm working on for the state, for the coordinating board, of building curriculum for freshman composition, where I've hired teachers from different community colleges, dual credit teachers. That's a special population that needs a lot of support. There's not a lot of credentialing for them that helps them. You get thrown into an area. So if I can create this open content and help them, so that's why I have not. I don't want. It's not that I would go backwards. It's not a forward, backward, anything move. It's just a different area where I'm at. And that actually, it's something I know. I'm old enough to I have a lifetime certificate. Yeah. So I can always go teach. I'm actually old enough to retire through TRS, but I'm not going to. And it's kind of what my youngest child, who is now an English major here, wants to teach. What she said, I realize you could go anywhere in the world and have a job. And I hate to make it so basic, but that's really comforting in a changing economy. You can go anywhere. If you can teach, stay at least 3 years. And if you can teach, you can do it, anything, anywhere. Okay, so we got to get back on topic because our topic is about assessment, right? and the reason why you're here is because of all the work that you've done with designing curriculum and your work in assessment here at A&M, and just as an English teacher to kind of give some insight around what assessment looks like in the classroom for you and just in generally. So we're gonna take the big question right here at the beginning. And you're a former teacher, someone who's worked at the state level on teacher certification requirements, all of that stuff. What are your feelings about mandated state assessments like the STAAR exam? Okay, I'm going to date myself on this one, but I've already done that. I don't care. I think my generation, which is Gen X, I think we're the reason that we have standardized testing. I don't know for certain. I don't think standards help to make people learn better or more. If there's not something that you have to strive for, then you have no way of achieving equity. And teaching in Title I schools versus very affluent schools, there has to be a way to, and the state project, how do we create the same, as close as possible to a level playing field for all students. Right, so making sure that Highland Park and Sherman and Odessa all kind of have the same sort of experience. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it comes down to accountability. When I began teaching, we had something called the TAAS test, T-A-A-S. And that, like now, it was up until 10th grade. 10th grade was the exit year. And it really was kind of a joke because I literally used to say, I'll teach my course like I usually do, and then 2 weeks before the test, I'm going to stop everything and teach them how to take this test. And I did that. And my students all passed. They did well because it was a bad instrument, the way it was set up. So I don't know that STAAR is it's a better instrument. I don't know that it's the only way, but it's one way. It's a way that we can get that equity across. Okay. So I think standardized testing for me, it holds us accountable. We have to have the same. We also have standards at the collegiate level. We have to maintain certain levels of compliance across various categories. We also have to deal with accrediting bodies. So, but I see the rationale now. This is the administrator speaking now. I see why, if I'm going to give you money, you should give me something, show me something for it. And so taxpayers deserve it. Their kids deserve it. We got the federal mandates, we got state mandates, we got to comply with all that. This is just it's a part of the job at this point, right? It is. I don't think it locks you in, though. That's why I say you probably, I don't know about physics, but it probably worked the same way. I would teach the way where I knew worked best for my students, but that also incorporated getting them the skills they needed.
Yeah, I was primarily an AP teacher, so we didn't have state assessments like STAAR, but we had the College Board AP tests, and it was very much the same way. It was, as long as you're teaching them the right stuff and you're teaching them critical thinking skills, then they're going to be able to pass no problem. You don't necessarily have to prepare them for the test, although that's, it's a plus. If they know what the format's going to look like, then they can do better. Okay, all right, so assessment is obviously a valuable tool that we use to find out a student's current level of understanding. But I think that most early career educators probably think of an assessment really in terms of like a multiple choice exam, right? I mean, because that's the easy way to do it. What are some examples of ways that we can gather information about student understanding in the classroom that's not necessarily a multiple choice exam?
Well, I've always been a big fan of like the turn of a question. So in answering a question with a question, you can call it a teacher trick to buy you more time to think of an answer. Say, ooh, that's a great question. What do you think? I don't know if that works in all disciplines. It works great in an English language arts class. But it's also a great way to find out what you as the instructor did not think of, because it's amazing when you turn that question, sometimes what you hear back is something you'd never thought of. I've taught To Kill a Mockingbird probably 15 times, and I don't know that it's ever been the exact same experience. I mean, first of all, they're different students, but also they see something I hadn't seen. It doesn't matter how many times I've read it or marked it up. It's always fresh. So I think that turn of a question is a great opportunity. Of course, there's always the low-stakes checks, a check for understanding like exit tickets or online polls, or we used to call them parking lots, the big sticky notes you could post, these are questions I have for next time. So to me, assessment's not just the big exam that determines whether or not someone receives credit for learning the content. Assessment's also about critically thinking of ways in which we cover our material or ways we should modify our methods. Because I also believe that you should ask students at various times during the course, assess me. Is this working for you?
Right.
It's midterm. Tell me, what should we keep doing? What should I change? What are you missing? And be open to that critique. Critique is not bad. It's just, and different is not bad. It's just another way. So I don't think you need to don't take things personally. Don't, kids are going to say things to you. Don't take it personally.
Yeah, well, I always thought assessment was essentially like a pulse check, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pulse check for the students, like how am I doing in the class, but it should be a pulse check for the teachers. Right now, I mean, teaching has gotten to be a data-driven sort of profession, because you're taking in all this data, whether that's numerical data or anecdotal data, or just exit ticket data, and you're looking, how did I do today, right? How did the lesson go for me today? Did I convey the information I wanted to convey? And if 85% of your students did and 15% didn't, then you know that you probably did a pretty good job in the classroom, and we need to work with those 15%. But if it's the other way around, if it's 85% didn't get it, then you know something probably happened, and you need to evaluate what you did.
Oh, I've had those moments, even at the college level teaching. That was why in a curricular redesign, there was one particular assignment I would give, and every time, 3 semesters in a row, I'd get papers back, and I'm thinking, these are awful. What is the problem? Well, look in the mirror. Because if it's the same problem over and over, then it's not them, it's me. So I had to find a new way of teaching it. So I think that's what assessment should be, is that don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
And that's kind of the fun
of teaching. Look for the experience. And don't be afraid of imposter syndrome. It's okay to admit, I don't know. Let's look that up. Let's find that out.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's fun for them, too, to show you. And like I said, they never underestimate a kid. I don't care if they have modifications and there's all these things, labels that are applied to them. Never, ever underestimate anyone. Be open to what they have to say.
For that early career teacher, how early in a lesson planning cycle should a teacher really be thinking about their assessment methods, timelines, when to assess, how to assess? When should that come into the planning process?
Immediately. I'm a huge backwards design fan myself, and I think I frustrate a lot of my colleagues in the academic building, because we'll approach a problem and okay, but what is it supposed to look like in the end? And they want to work on the minutia in the moment, but I can't. I need to know what the big picture is and work backwards to get us there. So I think that you should start from the beginning. I think I got that from my secondary teaching through the GT trainings I went through. My first year of teaching, my principal asked me, because no one wanted to do anything, any professional development. He had this money to go to something in 1992 called outcomes-based education. Do you want to do this? And everybody, oh, you don't want to do that newfangled thing. Well, look at what we do now. Everything is outcomes-based. So take advantage of those opportunities. But that taught me how to start at the end and work backwards and then look for nuanced ways. The GT training, I think, was great because once I learned that methodology, I applied it to everyone. I didn't care what the class composition was, that yes, you should give everyone a big question. It's going to take some different timetables to get to the answer, but there's nothing wrong with asking them. So build in some time for, you can call it remediation or review or whatever you want.
Spiraling.
Yes, or elliptical, I mean, however. But one thing I do want to point out, one thing that frustrated me, just be purposeful with it, because when I was a master's student, I think it was the third semester maybe, I got a paper back. We had these reflection papers, and I think it was like 4 pages. And I get it back, and on pages 1 through 3, I'm reading all these comments that the instructor wrote. This is brilliant, it's insightful, it's imaginative. And I get to the last page, and at the bottom it says 87. Thank you for laughing, because I felt the same way. And so at this point, I'd been a teacher myself for at least 12 years. And so I go to his office hours to ask him, not because I feel like you should give me an A, but I wanted to know, how do these words equal that number? Because brilliant and insightful, that's the higher level, verbs that you want. Yeah. And the look in his face, his eyes got wide. He had never been challenged. He'd never been asked to qualify how he arrived at a score. So I think that the sooner you think about it, the sooner it's easier, especially teaching in K through 12.
When I was teaching the last few years that I was teaching in Frisco, we were kind of going through that whole grading process, that grading idea, philosophical shifts around grading. And it was, if you don't know what mastery looks like, then what does the grade mean, right? I mean, what does a grade of a 90 mean? What does a grade of a 75 mean? How is a 75 different from a 78? Those are important questions. And so assessment really, if you're not being purposeful around it, and if you're not really designing it for a purpose of check of understanding, then you're not going to know whether your students got it or they don't. Or you're not going to know where they fall in that. What does mastery look like? Well,
and it's interesting you say that, because that even in what I do now with assessment with faculty of their programs, and the target is a B. That's your target. Yep. Mastery should go above and beyond.
Yeah, we had similar things. If we called a B proficient, right?
Yes.
You're proficient. You've learned enough to say that you are proficient in this material, and that's a B. And that didn't sit well with students.
No, that's why you say target. The word proficient has a negative connotation.
Yeah, but an A is an advanced, right? So they wanted to
mastery.
be advanced. Yeah. We need to throw all those terms out.
And then I get what do I do to get a 100 on my essay? You're never going to get a 100 on an essay, but that's something with college level students, of getting them to understand a 90 and a 99 both get you a 4.0. So
right. Yes, the GPA game
pick your
in
battles.
high school is terrible.
Yes.
Okay, so I know that many of our current Aggie Teach students have considered an eventual move from high school to post-secondary classrooms, so up in the collegiate level. As someone who's made that transition, do you feel that your time working with secondary students has helped you become a better college instructor? And if so, how does that look?
Unequivocally, without a doubt, yes. I won some teaching awards at the secondary level in different districts I was in. That was great. I've won teaching awards here from the provost, but I honestly feel like the only reason it took me about 10 years to say I'm a good teacher. I felt and I had won awards, but there's that feeling of self-doubt. But I learned how to make mistakes and learn how to be vulnerable in a secondary classroom, because there's so much on the line with kids. It doesn't matter what you're in. I think teaching in that secondary world helped me learn how to teach. I have some amazing colleagues who are brilliant people, outstanding scholars, but they are not approachable, or they don't understand. Right. They don't understand why someone doesn't understand what they understand. And I know that's repetitive of what I'm saying, but there's an old saying about, when did you learn what you know? It's when I had to teach it.
Right.
So,
we have a conversation in my intro class here at A&M that is about those qualities of effective teaching, and most of the qualities are not about how much you know. It's not about how many degrees you have or anything like that. It's about whether or not you are empathetic, whether or not you are friendly, whether or not you can identify with students, if you can communicate properly.
Yes.
And that is all that goes into K-12 teaching. I mean, K-16 teaching.
Yes.
If you're good at those qualities, then the content comes pretty easily.
Yes. But I would encourage anyone, if you are thinking that you want to end up at the secondary level teaching, please spend some time in your K through 12 schools. And if you find that you are in a middle school placement and you enjoy it, please stay there. I will find a way. Find me. We'll look for funding to give you extra pay, because that is a special time in life that's difficult. And that I only did it for 2 years because I'm not special enough. But there's a dance you have to do with everything that's going on within the student at the time, their age, and then just how they interact, parents letting go, and there's a lot of struggle but it's also incredibly rewarding what you get. And it doesn't matter. English teachers tend to be, I guess, we're more open, or students are more vulnerable with English teachers, but that's not necessarily true. I had a colleague when we team taught, my biology teacher was just amazing. There were always students waiting to talk to her because she would listen, or and it didn't have to do with biology. But that's part of what goes into teaching. But you can also weave in your content.
Yeah. You're not just teaching content. You're teaching life skills, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, you're learning how to adult, and I'm still learning how to adult.
I think we all are. It's a never-ending process.
No.
All right, so we're kind of towards the end of our time here, and I'm going to give you the microphone. Is there anything that you feel like our listeners, our pre-service educators, our early educator community needs to know about education, leveraging your own experience? What would you want to tell them?
I encourage you to join whatever professional organization you have for your discipline. For me, it was NCTE, still is, NCTE, National Council for Teachers of English. And it is a national organization that targets everyone from pre-K to graduate school to faculty in a higher ed setting. I was required when I was student teaching to join. Our supervisor required us to join, and at the time, $22 was a lot of money, and it still is sometimes. But I think we are a lesser expensive discipline; others are not. But there's a lot of resources you get from that. I don't know about physics, but in NCTE, and I think the NCTM for math does the same thing. Yep. There are special rates for students. There are national conferences, but there are also regional conferences, and there's a lot of networks. There's something through NCTE. They may have rebranded it, but it used to be called Read, Write, Think, and it's still it's like Teachers Pay Teachers, but a really good version, and it's free.
Nice.
Of everything, and it's vetted, and you can go by state, and it'll throw in whatever your standards are. If you've got TEKS, what do you have? A lot of states have a common core of assessment, so it sets your lesson to teach, because that's part of teaching also. You have to know the codes. You have to show I'm being assessed. These are the skills. These are the learning outcomes that we're teaching too. So your professional organizations help you to map that out across the whole spectrum of teaching.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty timely, because our next episode is about educational associations, and
perfect.
we have an alumni from Aggie Teach who works at TCTA, the Texas Classroom Teachers Association.
Oh, yeah.
So he'll be on our podcast for next week. So we'll talk about both sides. We'll talk about the kind of professional organizations that's more about supporting you as an educator, and then the professional organizations that support you as a content educator. So we'll be talking about both those next week.
I think that's the most. I think be vulnerable and ask questions, ask for help. Someone also taught me don't ask permission, beg forgiveness.
Right.
Just be careful, don't hurt anybody. So.
All right, and that is all the time we have today. Thank you, Dr. Pantuso, for being a guest today.
This was fun.
The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.